Imagine walking across a frozen wasteland. You have no food, your dogs are dead, your friends are gone, swallowed by the earth in a heartbeat. And with every grueling step you take, the skin on the soles of your feet simply peels away, leaving your raw nerves exposed to the sub-zero ice. This isn't a work of fiction. This isn't a campfire horror story. This is the true account of Sir Douglas Mawson, a man who stared into the frozen eyes of death and refused to blink. 100 miles of ice, starvation, and skin falling off the bone. While the Antarctic wilderness claimed everyone else, Mawson chose to walk. Today, on Defiant Souls, we explore the absolute limits of the human spirit. In the early 20th century, the world was gripped by the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. While giants like Scott and Amundsen were racing for the glory of the South Pole, a young Australian geologist named Douglas Mawson had a different vision. He wasn't interested in a mere trophy. He wanted to map the uncharted, gale-swept coast of Antarctica known as King George, the Fifth Land. In December 1911, Mawson and his team aboard the ship Aurora landed at Commonwealth Bay. They soon discovered why no one had stayed there before. It was the windiest place on Earth. Winds reached 200 miles per hour, capable of picking up a man and tossing him like a rag doll. But the expedition pushed on. On November 10th, 1912, the Far Eastern Party set out. It consisted of Mawson, a brave British officer named Belgrave Ninnis, and a Swiss champion ski runner named Xavier Mertz. They were supported by 17 Huskies and 2 heavy sledges packed with the survival gear and food they needed for a 500-mile journey. At first, the mood was optimistic. They were pioneers in a new world. But Antarctica is a silent killer, waiting for a single moment of human error. December 14th began like any other day on the ice. The sun was bright, reflecting off the blinding white plains. Ninnis was trailing behind with the larger sledge, the one carrying almost all the food, the extra clothing, and the tent. Mawson and Mertz crossed a snow-covered bridge. They felt a slight vibration but thought nothing of it. When Mawson looked back, his heart stopped. Ninnis was gone. There was only a gaping hole in the snow. They rushed back to the edge and looked down. A massive crevasse, hundreds of feet deep, had opened up. In the darkness of the ice, they could see one injured dog caught on a ledge. But below that, there was only a black, bottomless void. No shouting, no movement, no sign of Ninnis. He had fallen into the bowels of the continent, taking the survival of the entire team with him. For 3 hours, Mawson and Mertz stood at the edge, screaming their friend's name into the abyss. Only the whistling wind answered. They were now 300 miles from base camp. They had no tent, no dog food, and only 10 days of rations for themselves. Their situation wasn't just dire, it was a death sentence. The retreat was a nightmare of slow starvation. To survive, they had to start eating their remaining dogs. It was a brutal, heartbreaking necessity. But there was a hidden danger they couldn't have known. Husky livers contain levels of vitamin A that are toxic to humans. As they ate the dogs to stay alive, they were unknowingly poisoning themselves. Their hair began to fall out in clumps. Their skin became yellow and started to crack and peel in huge sheets. Xavier Mertz, the champion athlete, began to deteriorate rapidly. He suffered from stomach pains and fits of rage. He lost the will to move. On January 7th, 1913, deep in the frozen silence, Mertz suffered a final, violent seizure, and passed away in his sleep. Mawson was now completely alone. He was over 100 miles from safety, suffering from the same poisoning, with his body literally decomposing while he was still alive. He buried Mertz in the snow, fashioned a pair of makeshift skis from the sled runners, and prepared to face the end. This is where the story of Douglas Mawson enters the realm of the impossible. His feet were a mess of blood and infection. One morning, as he pulled off his boots, he realized with horror that the entire skin of his soles had detached. It was stuck to his socks, like a discarded mask. He didn't give up. He took that skin, smeared it with lanolin, bandaged it back onto his feet, and put on several pairs of socks to keep the meat of his feet from sliding around. Every step was a fresh agony. Imagine the sensation of raw, open nerves being pressed against frozen leather and ice for miles at a time. Then came the second encounter with the abyss. While crossing a glacier, Mawson fell. Suddenly, the world disappeared, and he was dangling over a crevasse, held only by the rope attached to his sled. The sled was slowly being dragged toward the edge by his weight. Mawson hung there, swinging in the cold dark. He thought about his wife to be Paquita. He thought about the men who had already died. He had a choice: reach for his knife and end the suffering, or climb. Despite his skinless hands and his starving muscles, he began to pull. He reached the top, only for the edge to crumble again. He fell a second time. Again, he climbed. When he finally crawled onto solid ice, he lay there for an hour, waiting for death to take him. But death wasn't strong enough for a soul this defiant. For the next 20 days, Mawson crawled and stumbled across the ice. He was a living skeleton. His nose was black with frostbite, and his fingers were raw. On January 29th, he found a miracle: a cairn of snow left by a search party just hours before. Inside was food and a note. He was close, but a massive blizzard trapped him in a cave for another week. He sat there, listening to the wind, knowing his rescuers were just miles away but unable to reach them. Finally, on February 8th, the weather cleared. He saw the distant silhouettes of his base camp at Commonwealth Bay. As he descended the final slopes, he saw something that would have broken any other human being. On the horizon, his ship, the Aurora, was sailing away. He could see the smoke from its engines. The crew had waited as long as they could. They had finally concluded that Mawson was dead. Mawson stood on the ice, a ghost watching his only ticket home disappear into the Southern Ocean. He was stranded for another year. Fortunately, a small party of 6 men had stayed behind to search for him one last time. They saw a black speck on the ice. At first, they didn't believe it was a human. They thought it was a hallucination or a wandering animal. When they reached him, one of the men looked into Mawson's haggard, blackened face and asked, "My God, which one are you?" Mawson spent the next year recovering in the very place that had tried to kill him. He returned to Australia a hero, but he didn't care for the fame. He returned to his maps, his rocks, and his science. He had survived the Antarctic hell not for a medal, but because he refused to let the darkness win. What Douglas Mawson teaches us is that the human body has a breaking point, but the human soul does not. When you think you've reached your limit, when the path ahead is nothing but pain and ice, remember the man who taped his own skin back onto his feet and kept walking. Stay defiant. If this story moved you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to find their inner strength. Subscribe to Defiant Souls for more stories of the incredible human spirit. I'll see you in the next one.